If you clicked on this video, you would like to learn to knit a granny square. Granny squares are usually made with a crochet hook and not knitting needles, but if you're anything like me, crocheting tends to leave my wrists sore and my fingers cramped because of how I hold the yarn to get the right tension. So I wanted to figure out a way to knit or make a granny square using my knitting needles. Usually when I want to learn to do something, the first thing I do is look online and see if there's already somebody out there doing it. I ran across this pattern. It's called Frankie's Knitted Stuff, How to Knit a Granny Square. And I used this pattern to create this square. I used the same size needles and the exact same yarn. And while this looks pretty close, it's not too far off and it looks nice. It just was missing something that it didn't look exactly like a granny square to me. And it didn't look quite open and it didn't have the same feeling. This is a quite dense fabric. It's not very open like most crochet granny squares are. They tend to be a lot more open, especially if you're using a larger needle with smaller yarn. So I started off here and I just wasn't quite there. It didn't sell me exactly, but this is a great pattern. If you like the way this looks, it's fairly easy to pick up the instructions, and you could definitely go and knit a granny square with this pattern. I found this on Ravelry and it's a free download, so you can definitely do that. I, however, wanted it to look a little more like crochet. So I added some parts to the pattern and I changed some things. So if you would like to come along with me and learn how I did this, you can follow along. I'm using size 8 double pointed needles. The bigger, the better. It's going to get you a bigger, more open fabric if you use bigger needles, and it's a lot easier to work with bigger needles. If you're using something small, it's going to just be really challenging. So a lot like crochet, you're going to actually start out with a slip stitch for this first part. And the first part actually is kind of the hardest because we're not usually used to working with just one needle or one stitch on a knitting needle and knitting into it many times. We always usually have more than one. So this first part is a bit tricky. And this is very similar to how he starts his pattern off with like a chain stitch. So you're going to start with one knit stitch and you're going to knit into that. And I found the best way to do this, instead of like pushing this all the way back down and then rotating the needle and using this needle, I found the best way to do this is almost to never, you barely take the needles out of the stitch. So I've knitted onto this needle here, my right-handed needle, and I immediately put the left-handed needle into that stitch. I do it again. I just take it out just a second. I go into the next one. This I found was the best and easiest way for me to get like a chain stitch here. In the Frankie's pattern, it calls for like a couple of chain stitches, probably like 2 or 3. Honestly, I found it almost impossible to get into the loop when I only did that many. So I did way more than that. Let's see, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm gonna do 5 chain stitches here. And then, a lot like the crochet with your hook, we're gonna go back down into that first loop. Okay, put the needle in, and this is going to be the hardest part because the chain stitch pulls the stitches tight, and you're always going to be a little more it's always going to be a little more challenging to get your needle in and out of that loop. So I've just put my needle in, I've kind of wrapped it around, and I've pulled it through. Okay, so here we are. You've got yourself a little loop there, and we're going to be knitting and picking up stitches down into that loop. Okay, you will always from this point on have 2 stitches on your needles. And we're going to be working in an I-cord fashion, which basically means you don't turn your work ever. You just essentially sliding your needle back and forth to work into the stitches. Okay, so for the very first, what would be considered a double crochet, we're going to knit one row, and then we're going to slide the needle down, and we're going to knit another one. Okay, and we're going to do this one more time. We're going to knit that first stitch. Pressure's on. I tend to get flustered. Okay, so we're going to knit the first stitch, and then we're going to knit almost like we're knitting, but we're not going to actually knit it. We're just going to slip that stitch off, okay? And then this is the first part of where we're actually going to go down into this little loop, okay? This is where what I did to get this result differs from what the Frankie's knitted stuff pattern is. I'm going to do a yarn over, okay? We're going to go down into that loop, and you're going to pull out a stitch. That pattern does not ever use the yarn over. I do. I feel like it creates a more accurate crochet, double crochet stitch than not using it, okay? And now what we're going to do is we're going to knit this stitch. Okay, so I've just transferred it from one needle to the other needle, and now I'm going to knit into it. And then I'm going to transfer the yarn over, and it's still tight. Everything is still very tight right now, so this is kind of a little more challenging, and you'll get the hang of it once you practice. I'm going to slip the yarn over that knitted stitch. Okay? Then I'm going to slip it back to the left-handed needle. I'm going to knit into it, and then I'm going to slip this stitch over that knit. So now technically what we have here is we've got this, the first I-cord counts as a double crochet, and that counts as a double crochet. Okay, so now we're going to do it again. We're going to yarn over. You're going to go down into the loop, wrap that, and pull it up. Now we're going to transfer our stitch, knit into it. We're going to slip that yarn over that stitch. We're going to transfer it back, knit into it. Okay, now at this point, you're gonna be like, oh, now it's time to slip this one over. But because we are knitting this and we want two stitches on the needles, what we're gonna actually do is we're gonna slide our needle down, okay? We're gonna do this I-cord. We're gonna knit one, and then we're going to knit those two together. Okay, so now what we have is our I-cord beginning, which is our first double crochet, a double crochet, a double crochet. Okay, and now we're going to want to, so this is the beginning right here. We're going to want to create enough for the loop of this corner. So we're going to continue with our I-cord. We're going to do one round or row, we're not moving in the round, and then two. Okay. And then on the third one, we're going to knit the first stitch, slip the second stitch, okay, and now we're ready to create our second cluster of double crochets. So we're going to yarn over first, go down into the loop, pick that, yarn that, like wrap it around the needle, pull that through, transfer back to your other needle. We're gonna go and knit that stitch. We're going to slip the yarn over, pass it back, knit it again, and then slip that stitch over that we slipped in the beginning. So we've got 1 double crochet. Now we're going to do it again. We're going to yarn over, go down into the loop, pull through, pass it back to your left hand needle. We're going to knit into that stitch. We're going to pass the yarn over. We're going to pass it back, knit into that stitch, and now, because this is the top of the previous double crochet, if you were to just slip that back over, that would be leaving this knit stitch too far away, and we want to carry that with us. So we're going to slide them down. We're going to knit into the first one, and we're going to knit these 2 together. You never have trouble until someone's watching you. Okay, and now you can see we've got 2 double crochets. We need to do another one. So we're going to yarn over through the loop, wrap your needle, pull it back. We're going to pass this stitch over, knit into it, pass the yarn over, slip this stitch back, knit into it, and now we're back again where we need to slide down. And we're going to work this knit stitch along. So we knit 1 and knit 2 together. So now we have 1, 2, 3 double crochets, a corner, and the first 3 double crochets. So what we will do now is work a corner, and then we're going to do 2 more of these into this loop. Okay, I'm going to do it, the first one slowly, and I'm not going to say anything so that you can watch, and then I'm going to speed it up to do the last one, and I'll come back and show you how to finish the round and add your next color. So I have just finished the little I-cord corner, and now I'm going to finish it off. You can see I've got 1, 2, 3. This would be the 4th corner. So I'm going to, and if you look, this is something I definitely noticed that was a little different. This is actually the front of your work, but if you turn it over on this square, it actually looks more like crochet, the front of a crochet work on this side. This side looks like the back of crochet, but this is actually the front of the knitting. And technically you can go either way with crochet. I personally have a tendency to think this front side looks better, but you know, you could go either way. And something that was different than from what I've done than what Frankie's pattern too is that he only, I say he, I'm not sure if this is a man or a woman that wrote this, but Frankie only has 2 stitches in each section here. So there's only 1, 2 stitches and then a corner stitch, 1, 2 stitches, and then the side stitch. The cluster is what is called in the pattern. On mine, I've done 3. I feel like it has a little more of a crochet look to do 3. Anyway, okay, back to the corner. We're gonna finish this off by, and I'll be honest, sometimes I pick different spots depending on how loose my stitches are. See, this stitch right here is a little looser than I would really like to. So I'm gonna pick, and I'm gonna put my needle in the V of the stitch right below it, okay? And I'm gonna wrap it and then pull it through, and then I'm just going to pass both stitches onto that. And then I'll pull this up. This is the one thing I hate about crochet, is that, especially when you're doing granny squares where you have different colors for each row, is the ends that you weave in. It drives me nuts. Anyway, okay, so I've pulled that through that loop, and now I've got a nice base crochet knitted square here. So in order to start the next round, what I'll do, instead of creating that loop here like this, I'm going to cast on 3 stitches. Okay. And then I'm going to pick a corner, any corner. You can pick the corner where you started from or where you ended off. You can pick the very next corner. You can pick any of them. It really doesn't matter. I'm going to pick a corner. Let me get myself all situated here. Pick a corner. I'm going to go in that corner. I'm going to pull up a loop. Okay, so now what we're going to do is just continue in the exact same way that we've been doing it. We're going to slip the stitch. We're going to knit into that stitch, and we're going to pretend like this first stitch like the very last stitch that we cast on is our yarn over. We're going to slip that over, and then we're going to slip it back. We're going to knit, and then we're going to slip this one over. Okay, so now we have our first double crochet into this corner. We're going to work 2 more of those. Oh, I have a tendency to knit quite tightly, and not every project is good with that technique. So it always takes me a little bit to get it back to being calm and loosen my stitches and relax. This is why I like knitting more than crochet, because I tend to get really tense, and then my fingers are hurting, my pinky is hurting from the tension, my finger up here is hurting from wrapping the crochet hook, and so I always end up being a lot more tense when I crochet, which is why I don't do it. Even though I learned to crochet when I was 7, and I didn't learn to knit until I was 18, so I've crocheted way longer. Okay, so we've got our second double crochet. We're going to slide back. We're going to knit into that first stitch. We're going to knit together that one, and now we're going to go for our third double crochet before the corner. So yarn over, in, pull up. If you crochet, you will notice that this is a very similar thing that you're doing with crochet. It's a very similar. Crochet will wrap once, go in, pull through, then they'll wrap the crochet hook, pull through 2, wrap the crochet hook, pull through 2. It's very similar, which is why it looks so close, because I'm doing a very similar movement. So I've got my 2 here. I'm going to work my corner, which is knit 1, knit the second row, and then we're going to prepare for our first double crochet, which is we're going to knit 1, we're going to slip this off knitwise, and then we're going to wrap, go in. So that's very similar. That's what crochet does. They wrap, they put their needle in, they pull through. And then what they're going to do is they're going to wrap and pull through 2, right? Then they're going to wrap. Oh, I missed that. Wrap and pull through. That first one was the first pull through. This is the second. So it is crochet technique. One could argue I'm not knitting this, I'm crocheting it with knitting needles, because I'm using the same movements that you would when you're crocheting. The difference is that extra stitch right here. I'm not chaining these corners. I'm doing an I-cord, a 2-stitch I-cord. So, am I really knitting this? I don't know. I don't think that it should be that big of a debate. We're all crafters sharing our passion with those people around us and those we love. But if you're going to be technical with it, some would say I'm probably not knitting. I'm just crocheting with a knitting needle. Okay, so I'm going to do my the third one in the corner. I've wrapped it, going in, pulling around, transferring it. I'm going to knit into that stitch, pass the yarn over, passing that back, knitting into it again, and now we're going to move that knit stitch along with them. Okay, so we have our first corner on the second round. Now the difference between obviously the first round and the second round is that we're gonna have like a little knitted gap between here, right here, for the next round to knit into, right? Because it's getting bigger. So instead of doing 2 of these little I-cord rounds or rows, I'm just doing 1. So I've done 1 I-cord row, like a short row, and I'm going to prepare for my next double crochet. I'm going to knit 1. I'm going to slip that stitch off knitwise. I'm going to wrap and go right down into the corner. Passing that, knitting into it, slipping the yarn over, passing it, knitting into it, slipping that top stitch. Now I'm going to do the same thing I just did before. So I'm going to speed this up so that we could get to the end and you can see what it will look like. I'm on my last double crochet of this last corner. All right, so it's about time to finish off this row, this round. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 corners. Just like we did on the first round, I'm going to finish it off on the side here. So I'm going to do my short row, which is 1 of these knitted rounds. And then I'm binding off, or I'm closing it off. So I'm not even going to do the prep for anything else. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at this where my cast on, I had like 3 cast on stitches here. I'm going to pick which one I feel. I don't want to go too far over and I don't want to go too far down because I don't want this down here. I'm going to pick whichever stitch here in this center of this row looks the best and it's not too gappy. That I know is going to pull tight. And I've only, see right there, I only picked 1 row. I don't like that. So I want to, I'm going to try and pick a different location where I can get a bigger bite. Oh, and I picked up way too many stitches. This yarn has not been my favorite. It splits really badly. Okay, so I'm going to pull it in or pull it through, and I'm just going to transfer these 2 stitches over that, and then I will pull this through all the way, Okay, and then obviously these two strands here are going to need to be woven in. But this is the second row. You can see on this side, if you turn it over to the back, this has a more crochet look to it. The back does. The front looks like the back of a crocheted granny square. So technically you can use either side. I think this one looks a little closer to crochet than this one does, but it's up to you. All right, so I'm going to go back to this cream colored yarn and we're going to pick up the next row. You can pick up the next row or round or whatever you want to call it. You can pick it up in the corner like we've been doing because there's only been corners, or you can pick it up here. Essentially, after the first one, picking them up for the next ones are all going to be the same as what we did on this one. You're going to cast on 3 stitches. Okay, you're going to decide where you want to start, whether it's in the center or in the corner. I don't like starting in the center or in the corner. If you do, good for you. Do what you feel the most comfortable doing and what is going to make this process easier for you. I like to start on like one of the sides. That doesn't mean you have to. So I've got my 3 cast on stitches. I'm going to go in. I'm going to pull this out. Okay. And then I'm going to work the double crochet. I'm saying it's a double crochet because it technically is the same way that I was doing before, right? I'm going to pass that first over. I'm going to knit into that stitch and I'm going to pass, which this essentially would be your yarn over, but because we're just starting, it's not. Okay. Now I'm going to pass this stitch back over, knit into it. We're going to pass that one. Okay, now we're going to continue working. Yarn over, we're going to go into and pull out a stitch. We're going to pass it, knit into it, pass the yarn over, pass this stitch back over, knit into it, and now we want to make sure we're transferring this. Essentially, it's the I-cord knit stitch, right? We want it to keep transferring and moving with these, so we've got to work our little I-cord, knit 1, knit 2 together. Okay, so we've got 1, 2 of those double crochets. We're going to yarn over, go in, come out, transfer that, and we're going to knit, take the yarn over that stitch, transfer, knit into it. We're going to work this. Essentially, it's an I-cord bind off somewhat. And knit 1, knit 2. And now we're ready to do our next, we're going to knit I-cord once. And now we're going to prepare for that next double stitch or double crochet that's going to be in the corner. So knitting, slipping 1, and now we're ready to work into the corner. Okay. So, I'll work the first stitch here into the corner. Essentially, this is it. This is what you're doing. You're just doing this over and over and over and over again. You can do this for as many rounds as you would like. Okay, so you're working 3, this little cluster here is the 3 double crochet, and then on the straight edges here, the sides, it's a 1 row I-cord, and on the corners it's the 2 row I-cord. And there you have it. Is it really knitted? I don't know. I use knitting needles. It's a lot nicer on my wrists. It's a lot nicer on my fingers. So I don't know if it's a knitted granny square or not. You can tell me if you think it's knitted or if you think it's crocheted. Either way, this was a lot nicer for me to knit and to create than using a crochet hook. If you have any questions, please let me know. And if you would like a written version of this pattern, let me know. I can type one up and put the link down below.